Okay, so can I welcome you all to this our general meeting. Because of the special nature of this meeting, I'm actually going to make an adjustment to the agenda, and I'm going to we're going to go straight into the meat of what this meeting has really been set up to focus on. And on that note, I particularly want to welcome David Lloyd, our Police and Crime Commissioner, and Assistant Chief Constable Matt Nichols, who are both joined us. Those of you who were at our last AGM will be aware that David and Matt came along, and at that meeting, a number of questions were asked, which, because of the nature of that meeting, we didn't want to take any great debate. We agreed that we would organize a follow-up meeting where those kinds of questions and other questions could be addressed by David and Matt. So in a moment, I'm going to just hand over to David and Matt to start this conversation off. And I think they're going to have a reflect on some of the questions that have been raised. But just before I do that, can I just check whether we've had any apologies for this meeting? Does anyone know of any apologies? Pearline, I think you're saying something, but you're muted.
Angela Wells.
Angela Wells has sent her apologies. Yes, I think I saw that. And anyone else? Okay, so welcome everyone. So I'm going to hand over to David, I think, first, and Matt to speak to us, after which we are going to take questions. I suggest that we put things in the chat as we go along, so that we don't lose sight of the questions that actually might need to be answered over and above whatever David and Matt will say. I know, for example, that one of the questions that we raised is more than likely to raise some additional questions coming from that. So, David, I'm going to hand over to you two, and then we will just pick up any other additional matters that need to be raised if they've not been addressed by your response. Okay.
Sorry, Chair. You need to know that I've got my hand up. You've asked me to monitor the chat.
Okay. Yes, Elaine.
Can everybody see the chat?
If you can't see the chat function, just the chat function is normally at the bottom of your screen.
Yeah.
And it's kind of a speech, normally a speech sort of a bubble, and that's where you can see it.
I'm trying to take my hand down, but I can't. I don't know why. So it's just to say the chat, I've got it on the right hand side, and I can see that Matt is thanking everyone for having him back to the meeting. Okay. Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much, Elaine. So if anybody has got a problem using the chat, then you can, as a last resort, you just have to put your camera on, put your hand up, and we will see it. But there's a chat function. I do know sometimes it doesn't work as well as we'd like it to. So I'm going to hand over to David and Matt. So welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Clive. Really nice to be back. And you'll know I was with you the back end of July as well. I think it's probably helpful, first of all, for me to say that I recognise that the audience that I'm speaking to knows far more and has suffered far more some of the things I'm going to talk about than I have. So I just want up front to say that if it seems as if I'm speaking in a way which is someone who doesn't know about these issues, I apologise up front. I just want to sort of put that out there because I recognise that I haven't had the same experiences that you are. So it does feel sometimes talking to people about issues around diversity and around fairness may be taken as if I'm sort of suggesting that I know more about it. Up front, I say I don't. So I just just want you all to recognize that and hear out what I'm going to say. And in many ways, one of the real benefits I get from coming to these sorts of meetings that I really enjoy is, first of all, it allows me to work through my thinking, to have it challenged, but also where I've not got it right or where I've actually made a factual error, to have it put right, because that's the only way that we all learn and we get to the point where we have a society which is fairer. And whilst I genuinely believe that we have a society which is getting fairer and fairer, I know that there's still some way to go. So that would be, if you like, the context. And when I came last time, I covered my thoughts with regards to what can best be termed fairness and confidence in policing that I'm working through. And it really interests me. It's an area that I intend to focus on in my third term of office. I specifically covered my concerns around what can be called racial disparity and disproportionality in the criminal justice system. And you all know that nationally we see racial disparity playing out in all aspects of society, early years, education. I know Clive and I, we've had this discussion before, but also those who come into contact with the criminal justice system. And we see this in the data in those who are being arrested, who end up in court and custody, and those who are frequent offenders. As I say, my office looked into the latest Youth Justice Board data from 2020, 2021, and it shows that pre-court, Black children are 4 times more likely to be arrested than white children. Of all children arrested, white children are most likely to get a caution and avoid going to court. In court, of all children, BAME children were nearly twice as likely to receive custodial outcomes or being sent to a form of prison than white children. And in terms of reoffending, white children had the highest rate of reoffences. And that might surprise some people. I suspect it surprises fewer of the people in this room tonight than perhaps in other places. But that, you know, those are the sort of the facts that we get from the Youth Justice Board, much of which David Lammy's report talked about 3-4 years ago, and we're still there. These statistics highlight the disparity we have in the criminal justice system in the life chances and outcomes of individuals depending on their protected characteristics. Unfortunately, these statistics are not new, and I recognise these challenges, and that is why a key focus in my 5-year plan will be on fairness and confidence in policing. At the AGM, I touched on stop and search, and more broadly the use of police powers, and how I'll be setting up an independent body-worn video scrutiny panel to dip sample body-worn video where police have used some form of coercive power, as we call it, whether or not that's pava spray, taser or handcuffs, and to provide a view on whether or not it was felt that the force was justified. Was it proportionate, ethical and legal, but also to ensure that we get the best from the independent scrutiny we need to have people on the panel who have lived experiences and have been subject to a stop and search or police using their powers. If used well, body-worn video can be transformational. It can lead to a reduction in the use of force, provide significant evidential material for court, and a reduction in complaints from the public. And perhaps most importantly, it can improve public confidence and trust. So I'd urge you all to consider taking up this voluntary role, which will take no more than a couple of hours a month, 2.5 hours a month. And Amy Berkhamshaw in my office, and perhaps the way to do this best is afterwards, if I get these details sent to you, but Amy Berkhamshaw in my office is the person to contact. At the AGM, important questions were raised, which we didn't have time to answer, and I'm now going to try and do that today. There were many similar themes: stop and search, hate crime, equality training, changes to probation. And as such, I've grouped them together, but come back to me if you don't feel I've fully answered them or I've misinterpreted them. And Matt as well will be able to respond on the operational bits, and I'll say where I think perhaps Matt might best be able to answer, and he might say where he feels I might best be able to answer, and hopefully between the two we'll be able to do it. I'm happy to take questions as I go. I can see something came up there to say question for David. So if someone wants to ask a question, feel free to do so, because that's a good point to pause before I get into the issues of the questions themselves.
So that's me, David, Elaine Nemhard. So while I understand the context of what you're saying, the Lamy report and injustice and unfairness that's existed for decades and decades, I'm moving forward to now about the prevalence of domestic violence in all families, not just Black families, but across all families, in particular in the pandemic. I come from a background where I work with children and families in child protection. In Hertfordshire, I believe domestic violence affects families around 96%. Of families that are referred to social services right across the country, not just in Hertfordshire, have domestic violence as one of the key issues with drugs and mental health. So there's the triple stressors. I don't know what the specific numbers are in Hertfordshire, but I know majority of the cases involve domestic violence and parental conflict. I understand that you've just been given £850,000 funding to tackle the prevalence of domestic abuse in Hertfordshire, but I haven't actually seen any strategies and your approach to reducing that particular stressors for families in Hertfordshire. And I understand that it was supposed to begin in September. So that's my interest.
Okay, would it be possible to come back? Can you keep me to responding to that? And I will, because we've got, we have a strategy. We've had a strategy since 2012 around reducing domestic abuse. You may or may not know that I've funded a significant uplift in the amount of officers in our domestic abuse DESU unit, and specifically I am now working with Catch 22 and using some of the funding from this around work with Catch 22 and No More are the organisation that are specifically picking this up now, who started in Stevenage and have now gone further afield. But if I may, can I answer the questions which are outstanding from last time, and then I'll be really happy to come back to that. Sorry,
David. I think that's the right thing to do because actually people were a bit frustrated last time that they didn't get some answers. So, but I think it's an important question that's been raised. So I think if we can come back to that. But can I just ask people when they're not speaking, just to prevent any difficulties, to just mute your phone. In fact, I tell you what, I'm going to mute all and then ask you to unmute David, just so that it makes it more easy to do that. Yeah.
There we go. Yeah, thanks. So I'm very happy to take all the questions. The first area of question was from Andrea, which was the first sort of grouping of them, which was, it would be helpful to have some feedback on your stop and search data, please, and also to know if the African Caribbean youth that are being stopped are local to Watford or from elsewhere. And having looked into this, according to a recent review in Hertfordshire, 18% of stop and searches of under 18s led to an arrest, and 82% led to no further action. So they're stopped and searched. About 1 in 5 of them then are arrested or other action like that. 82%, about 4 in 5, no further action. Specific to the Watford data, from September to August, a total of 221 Black people were stopped and searched. Most searches were under the Misuse of Drugs Act, Section 23, and 53 of the total stops, so 53 out of 221 were black people under the age of 18. 14 were not Watford residents, 13 of which were from Greater London. So I hope that covers that question off. And if it does, I move on to the question from Sonia: how many of the stop and searches can be attributed to the use of PACE? Section 1 of PACE, and again, this is the information I've been given. If there's any follow-up, I think Matt will be the man who, in fact, Matt, is it one that you particularly want to do anyway, because it does feel very operational? And whilst I know that PACE stands for Policing Criminal Evidence, is that right? Act. I've never had to use it in my life as someone who is a lay person. So
yeah, happy to take that one. Yes, Policing Criminal Evidence Act 1984. It's the basically it provides a code of practice as well for police officers in terms of how they act in many forms, whether it's arresting or searching or detaining and other areas. So that there are a number of powers in which police officers can undertake a search, and Section 1 of PACE is often quoted, and that allows us, when we have reasonable grounds to suspect that the officers will find what we call prohibited items, and those include offensive weapons, such as knives, stolen articles or property, and other articles that could be used in the commission of an offence. So, for example, a screwdriver that an individual might be going to burglar a house with. So that's one of the powers, but also a well-used other power is under the Misuse of Drugs Act 1971, Section 23. And that provides a power to search for controlled drugs, whether that be class A, B, or drugs. So all of your kind of drugs that are prohibited. That these numbers do fluctuate month to month. But what we do, and David has already mentioned that with the scrutiny panels, is that we carefully monitor those, and we monitor the performance as well. So largely, we are at a position where pretty much 1 in 5 stop and searches leads to the arrest of an individual that is carrying some form of prohibited article or drugs. So for us, that is a good ratio. Once upon a time, I remember it being as low as 1 in 10. So, with better intelligence and targeted approaches, and some of that intelligence, of course, comes from communities. And that's our level of trust and confidence that, the more that the communities give us in terms of information intelligence, the better targeted we can be. And therefore, the individuals that are not involved in criminality aren't getting stopped and searched. So it's kind of symbiotic relationship. We need to build the trust and confidence in communities in order to get the information intelligence to target effectively. Back to you, David.
Thanks very much indeed, Matt. That's very helpful. The problem with looking down these lists is that you then miss where you put your note. There we go. I think the next question was from. Sorry, I looked down to see what the next one that Matt was doing.
I think it's from Nessa, David.
It is from. That's right. Yes, which was about. You're quite right. Which is there any form of aftercare for those who are wrongly stopped and searched? After their search, nothing is found, and has that been considered? So, at the outset, officers will always give the grounds for the search on the basis that they have reasonable suspicion. And they don't always get it right and won't find an object or drugs. And we know from the county data that there's more to do to improve the positive outcome rate, which is currently, and as Matt's already said, it's got better, but it's currently at 23.5%. Whilst the constabulary do not have an official pathway for aftercare in place, officers will try and make every interaction a positive one, and all stop and search encounters are recorded, and the person's entitled to a copy of the search form following the search, which states the grounds and the details of the officer. An officer wouldn't ignore a member of the public in distress, and if there are any concerns over how a stop and search is conducted, they wouldn't then just ignore it. Should someone feel dissatisfied with regards to the legitimacy of the search or the attitude or behaviour of an officer, they can send in a complaint to my dedicated complaints resolution team, who will investigate it and provide a response within 10 working days. But I don't know if Nessa is here and wants to suggest what else might be appropriate.
I think it may be, David, that people may want to put some points there, because the point is that actually, and I see where people are coming from, that actually is a traumatic experience, being arrested, sometimes manhandled by the police. So, and when you're not guilty, to just being left in that situation, there's a question as to what is appropriate. So, colleagues, if there are thoughts that you have out there, then put them in the chat. David, I've got a list that you've got in front of you. So, and I probably have a preamble to the next question that you might be looking at, which is to do with harassment and abuse of NHS staff. And I have to say, I do some work in the NHS, and up to 2 days ago, I've had a complaint from a member of our frontline staff. And it's not, this is just one example. There are plenty of examples I come across where that individual has been racially abused by one of the service users. And you will know, as I do, that actually racial harassment is in fact a crime. And if you, I've seen plenty, it's quite frequently, I see this in court where people have been charged with racial harassment. Now, what I think we're hearing is that staff will report to the police around being racially harassed, and it appears the police is not doing anything about this. So I think that's just the nub of the question, which I think stem from something that I said at AGM too. So I presume that's what you're now going to address.
So that one specifically was within the NHS where race hate crime doesn't seem to be addressed appropriately, I think is how it was written up.
Yes.
I mean, hate crime is taken really seriously in Hertfordshire, and is still monitored against all 9 of the protected characteristics. And we've still got 4 dedicated hate crime officers who are able to monitor and ease community tensions and build up a relationship with those who may be distrusting. And in Watford, we have PC Howlett Bolton, who's the hate crime officer, who has well-established links within the Community Safety Partnership and welcomes any contact from you at WACA. The county-wide Hate Crime Partnership Board, which is made up of all relevant statutory agencies, together with charities, community representatives, including Hearts Equality Council, monitor hate crime data on a quarterly basis and are alive to the changes in national and local events and the impact this has on hate crime. And in Watford last year, there were 92 hate crimes, up 3.4% on the last year. That increase has been in areas other than race, the largest being in hate crimes motivated by religion or faith, and racial hate crime had decreased by 4.3%. So I'd encourage any victim of a hate crime to report any hate crime so it can be investigated. And if you've got evidence that it isn't being, I would still urge you to keep reporting. The reporting officer for any hate crime completes a risk assessment, and in conjunction with the hate crime officer, tailors an appropriate response and safeguarding if it's required. And the prevention first operating model is employed by all of our officers. My understanding, and I don't know the individual issue within that hospital, but the reflection back that I'm getting is that we are taking it really seriously. So that doesn't match up with what you're saying. It may be, Matt, I don't know if you've got anything that you might want to bring in to expand on that at all.
Before Matt comes in, let me just say though that, David, because of the work that I do come across a number of these cases. So it's not a particularly isolated incident. So the question is, I suppose there's a question of how has that been monitored to ensure, because the impression I get is that actually people are reporting this and the police isn't actually choosing to take any action where clearly there is evidence that people have been racially abused. I mean,
what I think would be helpful would be to work that through, because you made a statement that people are reporting it.
Yes.
If it's reported, it'll be in the system. And I just don't understand how, if it's in the system, it isn't being, in your words, taken seriously, because that's not what I'm hearing. That doesn't mean to say I don't believe you, because clearly it hasn't been, there hasn't been an outcome that makes you feel that it's been taken seriously. But I'm just trying to work out whether or not that's because it hasn't actually been reported, or if there is a failure somewhere in the system, which Matt might be able to help, because again, he's in the system and I'm not.
I've got somebody who wanted to ask a question, I think, in relation to this. Hilda, I think you wanted to come in.
Yeah, actually, I think for me on the ground, it feels like, because I work in mental health, and it's a very constant, regular thing that happens. And given my role, I can't say where I work, we do, like what Clive is saying, it happens quite frequently. And people, staff do report it to the police, but there seems to be quite a high threshold of intervention by the police. And one of the complications is always the thing about somebody's mental capacity. And so it tends sometimes to be put down to the fact that the person is actually unwell at the time and we really can't do anything. I also had an incident where the police said, because it happened on the ward, it was not a public place, so it may not be deemed to be a hate crime, which I found quite, intriguing. They didn't consider the ward to be a public place. So I just thought I would throw that on the ground, there is a perception that it's not taken seriously by the police when it's reported.
Matt, you might have a...
I mean, first of all, we recognise that any form of hate crime should be taken very seriously, because it's referencing an individual specifically, whether it's the colour of the skin or their sexuality or their disability or whatever other protected characteristic it might be. So I'm like you, David, intrigued to understand where these crimes are coming in from. If they're in the system, there will be an appropriate triage system put in place. We abide by the victim code of practice to ensure that victims are kept up to date with the progress of the investigation of their crime. And we very carefully monitor our hate crime figures regularly. So if someone has got a specific example, then what I would suggest is that you put it on the chat bar or email it into me, and then I'll get somebody to have a look specifically at that relevant crime.
Matt, I think that as I've got a specific example that's just come across to me, I've not looked into the detail, but I'm definitely told that it's been reported and the police are taking no action. So I'm going to see if I can identify that. And David was indicating that there was a race crime officer across the county. Some of these are not all in Watford, some in other parts of the county that the health service organization operates from. So I'm actually going to look into that one, and I'm going to, how do I follow that through to find out whether in fact it has been recorded and how that has actually been dealt with?
Well, in the very first instance, anyone that's reported a crime will have a crime number and a dedicated officer linked to that. So that's the starting point. If there isn't a crime number, then it probably hasn't been recorded as a crime. But if they've contacted the police and spoken about an incident, we should at least have an incident reference number through our force control room. So, and if there's neither of those, then I would need to probably find out roughly the time and date that individual thought that they'd contacted the constabulary or another force, so that we can track it down that way. Because all calls into the force are recorded.
One question, a follow on from what the point that Hilda was making. Is it the case that irrespective of the capacity of the alleged perpetrator, that would still be recorded as a crime?
So under the National Crime Recording Standards, it should be, if it meets the threshold for a crime, which is a pretty low threshold, then it should be recorded. Whether it then gets actually investigated would be another matter, because one of the things that we have to take into account working with the Crown Prosecution Service is whether it would be in the public interest. And of course, and I don't know the exact details of this case, but in certain circumstances where individuals may be suffering and in a place where they are getting treatment for their mental health issues, that might be deemed as therefore not in the public interest. But I would need to understand that the details of that. And of course, if you've got a repeat individual that's doing that, then we would need to want to take a closer look at that. And also, I would suggest that any organisation should have policies in place as well to support those staff members and ways of dealing internally with some of those individuals also.
Okay.
Chair, Danielle put something in the chat that I think she might want to raise. She said, I've been left without it with of trepidation following being stopped. I believe that relates to the stop and search. I've never broken the law. My complaint was ignored for months and still has not been resolved. So that's a complaint made regarding stop and search. Where's Daniel? That was in the chat.
She may not want to. Sorry, Daniel, did you want to speak?
No, not necessarily. No, I was just making a comment on what was said earlier, that it is something that needs to be addressed, because it isn't always, the complaints aren't always addressed. And we are left feeling anxious after being stopped and searched, and there's no real good reason for it sometimes. So that is something that needs to be addressed. There needs to be some sort of aftercare.
And following from what Hilda was saying, and I would say that you said good organizations should have policies in place. Well, I can tell you, as a social worker on the front line in Hertfordshire for many, many years, that's not the case. I can go to a family and be racially abused and nobody actually take it seriously. It's almost like, you know what, it's part of the job. So maybe the county needs to have something in place that recognizes that staff are continuously abused, and it's put down to, as Hilda said, mental health. Usually personality disorder is one of the key one, yeah? So people with borderline personality disorder or emotionally unstable personality disorder, parents, you can go to their home and be expected to abuse, and occasionally, yeah, having a great big dog, yeah, standing in front of you, yeah, which can be quite intimidating. You go back to the office and you report what's happened, and it's like, oh, it's part of the job.
Okay.
It's not really taken seriously.
Elaine, I take your point, but actually that particular bit is something that's got to be for the
No,
organization.
I'm just getting it off my chest, Clive.
So we'll kind of let Matt and David deal with the things that really is within their remit. But
Yeah,
I think we all have to take on board that point. Yes,
no,
David.
but he said good organization should have policies, and I'm
Yes,
like, okay,
I agree. Yeah.
that he mentioned that.
Yes, yeah, indeed.
And I'm very much listening to what you're saying, and I recognise that the way that many of the organisations that we work for don't support us in the ways that they should support us. And I think actually that's something that's worth teasing out a little bit, because I think one of the issues may be that people are discouraged from reporting to the police, either actually discouraged or are implicitly discouraged, in the terms of what you've already said of, well, when you're working here, you expect that to happen, or something along those lines, which really isn't. And I think culture is changing, but very often, there's been an acceptance that we just have to grin and bear it. I know that sometimes I, as a politician, believe it or not, get some rather difficult things written to me and said to me. And, to an extent, people say, well, you've got to put up with it because you're a politician. And actually, that's not true, is it? I shouldn't have to, and you shouldn't have to. So there is something about societal change. But the bit that I'm hoping we can learn about this evening and do something about this evening is the whole piece around what happens when we've received a complaint in the police. What happens if, as a result of what the police have done, as you said, that people feel frightened or whatever, what's the impact of that? And what happens if a racial crime, a hate crime based on race is reported? And my understanding from what I hear, and my belief, is that we take hate crime really seriously. But I have to also hear what you say, and that's not what your belief is from what I'm hearing this evening. So, I think that's been really useful to hear. And Matt and I will need to go away and think about, are there other things we can do? Are there other ways of showing it? And hopefully, in some ways, having us here this evening, talking through, listening, responding, might at least start to move it slightly, that you realise that we do care, and that it is something which is important to us.
David, just to say though, even despite what I've said in response to Elaine's observation, you did make a point that actually there is a multi-agency partnership that's around this. So in that sense, you have a place at the table where you can also be emphasizing to a partnership organization the importance of actually them having these support mechanisms in place. So whilst it's not the core of our conversation, clearly you also have a responsibility for doing that too.
Yeah, there was a really interesting question, sort of moving on, which I think probably is best for Matt to answer about that. I'm not sure who asked it, but last time round, it was really a heartfelt question of, with regards to serving the public, it's important to remember that Black youths are members of the public too, pay taxes too, and when stopped and manhandled, it can be extremely traumatic for a young man going about his business to be surrounded by several officers on the street. When the police walk away from that, do you give any thought at all to the trauma you leave behind, which is in some ways the same as, are you giving any aftercare? But I don't know if you want to come back on that, Matt.
Yes, thank you, David, and thanks for the question. And just so that people know some of my background, my career started off in London, and I worked in places like Southall, which had a large Asian community, and worked in Notting Hill, which had a large Black community. And then when I came to Hertfordshire, the place that I worked for a number of years and then returned to was Watford. So I like to think that I've had a reasonable policing career in understanding some diverse communities. And our starting point is that, you know, we will always treat people with dignity and respect. And I think a recent example, which we were pillared for in the media, was in relation to how we were dealing with some recent protesters. And actually, what we were doing, we were treating them with dignity and respect. They were of a certain demographic, and the officers checked what they needed, whether they had any concerns before they were going to be arrested. So I like to think that actually that's a really good recent example of how we do treat people with dignity and respect. So we will always try and have positive interactions. One of the things we talk about to all officers is every contact leaves a trace. And where we do also understand that stop and searches can be embarrassing for many people. And so where possible and operationally available, we will do it out of the public view with the minimum number of officers. And obviously we will always use proportionate levels of force. Any stop and search now, the expectation is that the entire encounter is recorded on body-worn video for openness, transparency, and accountability. But that's not always possible. Sometimes interactions don't always play out in a passive way. So I do accept that sometimes stop and searches can be quite confrontational. But as I say, you know, to give you all some reassurance that that body-worn footage, which David touched on earlier, is regularly reviewed. And one of the things that we do is we check the levels of compliance that officers undertake with their body-worn video, you know, because it's all digitally recorded and stored. So we can go in and we can actually use those in order to also check on whether officers are following the correct procedure. And David touched on it earlier. Under Police and Criminal Evidence Act, any stop and search, the officer is required to go through a series of statements. For example, the grounds in which the stop and search is taking place, the object being looked for, the identification of that officer, the station to which they are attached to, and the entitlement to the individual being stop and searched, that they have an entitlement to a record of that stop and search. David also touched on the independent scrutiny panel, and we've certainly engaged East Herts Black Parents Association, who have come along and observed that panel. So again, an open invitation to WACA members to come and see that that scrutiny take place.
I think I think in the chat the chat is running really fast, but there's some really good questions and observations in the chat.
Okay.
I think we mustn't miss share.
Can I suggest that we now, I know the things are in the chat, but can I suggest that we deal with the questions that we currently have? And then, because we're going to run out of time, and it looks like we may have to run over time. I know some people may need to leave. I'm not too sure what David and Matt's position is, but can we maybe see if we can just sort of summarize some of the key points relating to the other questions, so we can get through them, so we can pick up some of these other questions that people are raising. We did encourage people to ask other questions, and there's some other questions there too. So did you want to carry on with the next question, David? I see there's a few others that haven't been answered.
There are a few others that haven't been answered, and I'm happy to either move on completely if you want me to, or to answer these. But the next question was from Joe, which was where you referenced disproportionality. We could call it what it is: structural racism that's driven by negative stereotypes and the preconceptions of police officers. Fundamentally, we know that the thing that diminishes these preconceptions is meaningful and personal connections between human beings. Do you think there are enough police officers that our police officers have enough time to meaningfully be part of the communities to which they serve? And some of the chat also picked up the issue of what we're doing in terms of recruiting police officers. from specifically from the Black community. So I think that I'll respond to that within this response, which is, you'll know that I'm fully supportive of maintaining and growing local policing. It's the bedrock of crime reduction in Hertfordshire and the foundation of partnership working, community engagement. Creates a police force that's embedded in and supported by a community working together to cut crime, rather than one which is distant and engages only when they're called in to clear up the damage. That's why over several years I've looked to invest heavily in making sure that the force is up to establishment levels and have the opportunity to engage and build relationships with the communities of Hertfordshire. Through the extra funding raised through the council tax precept, along with the new officers as part of the government's uplift programme, 351 new officers are joining Hertfordshire over the next 2 years, and Hertfordshire is already the biggest force ever that it's been in its history. So I'm asking the Chief Constable to reassure me that he's doing everything in his powers to ensure that the new recruits bring further diversity into the constabulary, and ensure that as far as possible we have a police force that is representative of the community it serves. Our numbers of officers who identify as Black, Asian, or from other minority ethnic groups is slightly lower than the national average, 5.2%, compared to 7.1% when set against the population stats of Herts. The difference is less marked. But I still recognise that to get to that level is going to take some while, and I'll come back to that as well if I might. Hertfordshire are not alone in their diversity statistics, and most forces struggle to ensure representativeness, but that doesn't stop them trying. In Hertfordshire, there have been considerable efforts to tackle this. Over the past 3 years, 6.7% of our new recruits have identified as Black, Asian, or from other minority ethnic groups. We're making some progress towards being representative, but we need individuals from all communities like this, the Watford African Caribbean Association, to consider a career in policing, whether that be on a full-time or voluntary basis as a special constable. We've got a positive action recruitment team who are pushing this agenda forward and continuing to reach out to those with protected characteristics. But these efforts don't stop at the point of appointment either. Members of staff are supported to ensure they reach their full potential with active and engaged representation, groups, mentors, and senior leadership support. Officers are working hard to be part of the community they serve meaningfully, and Hertfordshire has a dedicated hate crime officer and has created a new equality, diversity and inclusion unit, which is headed by Inspector Steve Allison, and his role involves establishing networks with communities which can be maintained for the long term by the Safer Neighbourhood team. I had a presentation yesterday in which I was told of the efforts that the team are going to ensure that those people applying, if they are from Black, Asian and minority ethnic groups, that if perhaps midway through their application, it's quite a long application, they don't continue with the application, that we will try and contact them to say, you haven't finished your application yet, can we help? Not why didn't you do it? Can we help? Can we support you to come through? But it's a long, hard process. If every single one of the 350 new recruits were to be Black, we would still not be at the 10% level. Sorry, we would be, wouldn't we? It's 2,500 officers. So it would still be a minority of that group. And we know that it is very unlikely, in fact, it's impossible, that every single new recruit will come from the Black community. So there is more that we have to do, but we are working really hard on it. And Matt, I think you put something in the bar, but you might want to come in on the back of that as well.
Yes, thanks, David. I was just putting some stats in broadly. We are recruiting more, and as David says, we've got more police officers now than we have in the history of Hertfordshire previously. A lot of effort is going into attracting diversity, particularly Black, Asian and minority ethnic officers. Up to June this year, we were just under 6% in terms of BAME representation. That's 122 officers. And between April and June this year, we recruited 13 further BAME officers, which was the number that we recruited in the whole of the previous year. So I think we're making headway. We know there's still a long way to go, but that's where we need everyone's help, including those on this call now. We need to attract people from diverse backgrounds into policing. And we recognise in order to do that, we have to show that we've got the trust and confidence in the community. But we're doing that, we hope, with some of the transparency that we were talking about earlier in this call, which is specifically around body-worn video, holding officers to account, and scrutinising actions. So I think the summary is we are making progress, but we recognise there's still a lot to do, and it's hard work, and we need everyone's help. Thank you.
Thanks.
Sorry, Clive.
Clive,
can I please come in on that one? Matt, I hear you and I hear all the statistics, but we all know what Disraeli said about statistics. All I would want to say is, from a personal point of view, I have a granddaughter whose heart was set on joining the police. I've got a goddaughter, both of them went off to university with the intention of joining the police. They're doing criminology. Clive, you know that she did a dissertation around how Black people are treated in the judiciary and the criminal system, including a thorough analysis of David Lammy's report. Yeah, she was so disgusted at the end of the degree that she changed her mind. She had no positive view of the police whatsoever, and that it was an organization she wanted to join. Okay. That's after really starting with enthusiasm. She ended up totally despondent and changed direction. And so did my goddaughter, both of them, two very strong young women who were so sure this was the career they wanted.
Thanks, Elaine. What I would say is that actually, Matt, you've put your finger on it, really, because I think really there's a situation where we have to develop trust and confidence. If you don't have that trust and confidence, then people are not going to feel that they're
definitely not.
So it comes to David. I'll just glance at the questions that we had remaining. I think there's one main question I think that was remaining, which was relating to the training of police officers, and I think there were two bits of the question. Somebody wanted to know what the exact cultural and racial equality training that the police members are undertaking, and how is it measured. And I think there was a final question that was looking at mandatory equality and diversity training for the police.
Matt might be the best person to pick that up.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and sorry, I was trying to do two things here. I was trying to put in the chat bar. So the lady that spoke very eloquently about her, I think it was her daughter and her goddaughter.
Yeah.
What I would say,
granddaughter and goddaughter.
Okay, granddaughter and goddaughter. All I would say is, if you would like to point them in our direction, I'd happily arrange for a ride along where they can come in and sit in a police car and do a shift with our police officers and get first-hand experience of how we interact with the community and how hard our officers work day to day. So that's an open invitation. If you'd like to contact me, I'll make those arrangements.
Matt, I'm not saying that's aimed at Hertfordshire Police. I'm just saying it's the police overall. It wasn't specifically aimed at Hertfordshire.
No, and I know you weren't aiming it specifically at Hertfordshire, but what I'm saying is that these are the things that we have to do and can do in order to try and rebalance people's views, and that's why we've got to work doubly hard to because it sounds like they were very much set on a career and they've been put off, and I'd like to try and rebalance that. But specifically in relation to equality and diversity training, so I think first of all, police initial training, learning and development has changed fundamentally this year. So in essence, it's called PEQF, the Police Education Qualifications Framework. And that means that officers now either come in as a police constable degree apprenticeship. So they will undertake a 3-year, not 2-year as it was, but a 3-year training program where they will receive a degree at the end from Anglia Ruskin University. Part of that overall training will involve equality and diversity training and a proper immersive learning around what our code of ethics, which is broadly based around the Nolan principles of life in public office. Equality, diversity, and ethical decision-making runs through the whole curriculum, and a lot of officers will use what we call the national decision-making model, and at the centre of that decision-making model, which I won't go into detail, but is the code of ethics, and that should underpin decisions that officers are making on a day-to-day basis. In terms of officer attitude and behaviour, they are regularly looked at across the course, and you've got to remember as well that we recruit from the public, and we recruit from a wide range of people in the public, and so those individuals in and of themselves will have some different views. But what we make clear is our code of ethics and the importance of equality and diversity, and that these individuals that join us and hopefully spend a career with us are professional and follow those code of ethics. We naturally have a professional standards department as well, and should we be seeing particular complaints about an individual officer, then we will look into their training record, look at their behaviours, and where appropriate, put into place additional learning, or if appropriate, there would be other sanctions available for that officer if they're not displaying the attitudes and behaviours that we would expect. We also undertake a lot of role play exercises, and sometimes we get in the local colleges to come in to help with those role play exercises around stop and search, so individual officers can see how the impact of their approach to particularly younger people can have an impact, and then feedback is given to those officers. So and again, there's an open invitation. If anyone from WACA would like to come along and witness some of the training that our officers have, or in particular some of the stop and search training, then again, you'd be very welcome to come along.
I'll be happy to volunteer to observe, Clive.
Yeah, point taken. Thanks very much for that, Matt. I noticed that there are, as Elaine has pointed out, some additional questions, and I think there was one here which is around I think links to stop and search, but it's kind of about what are you doing in order to advise the public as to what is in fact the correct correct approach to stop and search that they should anticipate being recipient of, so that people know what to expect from a correct stop and search.
If that's directed to me, so I'm fairly confident that if you just Googled stop and search, there will be lots of solicitors firms and lots of charitable organisations that would already have been posting what to expect. But as I've explained, and as David has explained, there's a clear requirement of what we expect from officers when they undertake that stop and search. And as I've said, from a scrutiny point of view, they will be recorded, and they can be looked at subsequently. But you know, I go back to the point that yes, be respectful and treat people with dignity, and then once you've given your grounds for the search, you explain what the object is that you're looking for, you identify yourself and which station you're attached to, and you give them their entitlement that they can have a copy of that stop and search record. That stop and search record, as well as the body-worn video, is available for subsequent scrutiny.
Chair, the partnership needs to be made public and known to the public, especially the youth. What is that about?
I think that question relates to the point that David made about working in partnership with other agencies. Yeah, I think the question is, who are the partners in that partnership? And do we as the public know that these are the partners? I think this refers to substantive partners, not, for example, us as a community group that you're relating to now, but for example, HCC, and I imagine the local authorities who are on this partnership group. I think you referred to, David. I think that's what the question is.
I think that you're referring to the Stop and Search Scrutiny Panel, and the Stop and Search Scrutiny Panel is not made up of statutory people. It's made up of volunteers who are chosen by my office. And I haven't got the figures in front of me, I'm afraid, but I think I gave them last time round about how many of those are how representative they are of the community. Actually, there's a slightly higher number of people from Black and minority ethnic groupings within that partnership, and what they do is that they go round each of the districts and they look at the body-worn video that's been worn and look at how the stop and search was conducted. So that's not a statutory body. That's a body that's set up by me to ensure that the stop and search is carried out fairly through the dip sampling that we're doing, and is chaired independently of me. It's just changed chair, and I haven't got the name in my front of my mind. It was a retired judge who chaired it, but it's normally someone of some standing and understanding of how the system should work.
Thank you. Chair, you asked me to monitor the chat, so I'm just going to just say, somebody commented on what Matt said. They said, with respect to your personal work, Matt, I thought you talked about working in London and Watford, etc. It does not represent the majority of policing. This is why Black people are seeking change. Yes, we understand that you've got that wealth of experience. However, it doesn't represent policing as such. I personally saw what they call them, a chugger. Is it a chugger? Do you know the people that go around and sign up for charities? So it's just an example of where I live. And he'd actually, a little young Black guy came to my door. He was probably about 18, 19. And he came to my door. We had a good conversation, and he was doing for the Red Cross and the charity, getting people signed up. So I came up my house a couple of minutes later to get into my car, and he was being stopped a couple of doors down by the police, up against the lamppost, wanting to search him. I went straight down there and I said, what's happening? The lady, he'd actually knocked at this old lady's home, and I understand it. She called the police. They were around in minutes. I can say your response time is really fantastic where I live anyway. They were there in minutes, and they had him up against a lamppost and wanted to search him. I then went and intervened and said to him, because I knew his name from talking to him, oh, what's the matter? What's going on? And he explained to me that he knocked on the old lady's door, and before he looked around, she wouldn't open the door, and he's just walking away. The police came and wanted to search him. I intervened, and they just said, oh, sorry. But if I wasn't there, I think what would have happened to this young boy would have been very different.
Okay.
And I recognize what they're saying about your experience of policing is not necessarily what happens in general.
I take your point, Elaine. I think all of us, I think, would agree that actually often when we talk to people like David and Matt, then they certainly will be assuring, whereas the experience that people have isn't necessarily as assuring. So I think we have to take it as a given, Matt, that we understand what you're saying, but actually it doesn't reflect the kind of experiences that people are having. Elaine, I know I did ask you to do this, but just in a matter of time, I noticed that actually there were a number of bits of statistics that I think one of our participants had left there. I think probably you can see those, Matt and David. I don't know whether or not you have some of those probably reflect some of the things you've already said. I don't know if there's anything that you disagree with where that is concerned. I think beyond that, okay. I think, let's see what other questions, because those are matters of information. So is there anything amongst that information that a colleague has posted that you disagree with?
Some of those stats David spoke about earlier.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So it's more for information. Okay. So the lady who wants to witness the stop and search training is Elaine Nemard. So we can share that information with you. There may be other people similarly. Given time, I might be willing to do it too, but that time is really pretty difficult for me to find. My wife tells me that I'm not finding enough time for her. So Elaine, was there any other questions?
Yes, Clive. I want to go back to the domestic violence situation.
Yes,
it doesn't necessarily have to be now. And I'm going to put to Matt and David a little bit of the context of what I'm saying. I worked in Hertfordshire as social worker for some time. And what I can see is sometimes when I read the referrals from the police about what happened when they visit a family's home prior to referring into MASH, I read it, and sometimes there's some stereotyping of the description of what happened with families in Black family, the angry Black woman, the angry Black man. It is so different. You can just smell the unconscious bias just leaping up off the page in the way officers write, these referrals or what their observations were. Then that lead the MASH team into a certain form of decision. And what happens, the outcome of that for Black families is that they're treated more harshly when it comes to the child protection process. I've raised this with Clive before, so it's not just now, just because you're here, but it's something that's been burning me for 3 years, is that the way officers write those referrals and description of what they observe with Black families is just so toxic. It leads the MASH team to making a decision that could have been otherwise, it could have been different. And then what happens is you will find majority of Black families, when it does come to child protection procedures, their children are more likely to be subject to child protection plans and be treated harsher. And for me as a social worker, it's a bit like what you were saying about young people being treated harshly in the criminal system, in the justice system, than white kids. This is what's happening to families. And the impact of that on our Black families is really quite horrendous, but nobody's actually looking into that. And it starts with those reports that your officers make into the MASH team.
Okay, so I think I can't see any other. I can't see any other questions in the chat. So I think.
Sorry, Clive, not just to leave it hanging, because you know that I'm passionate about this. So if Matt and David could bring somebody from, I don't know, your local safeguarding board or whoever you work with, those early help, those partners that you work with, for us to have this as a similar,
Yes.
join us in this meeting.
Yeah.
I'm quite happy to help
We
participate and hopefully for people to see what's actually happening there.
I think that the issue of domestic violence is certainly very much in the spotlight at the moment, particularly on the
It's not just about domestic violence, about the child protection process.
Yeah.
So
the family.
Contention.
So David, you wanted to come?
Well, I think the contention that's being made is that there is a different bar which is set, for want of a better term, that somehow the because of the way the reports are written up, that there is an unconscious bias within those reports.
Absolutely, David.
About specifically about Black families, and that therefore the response is different. And I have to say I'm not aware of that. You've been involved. I haven't. I'm not operational. You, to that extent, have been. Matt might have a view, but I'm just trying to see how we're going to be able to tease this out in such a way. I mean, I think it's an important point you're making, but I'm not sure that I've got a response which is based on evidence, because it's not something I do. Matt, I don't know if you're close enough specifically to the domestic abuse area to be able to comment.
It's not just about domestic abuse.
No, I understand.
Thank you.
Yes, I look after safeguarding as one of my responsibilities within the force. I think there's a number of ways we can approach this. I think first of all, providing us with one or two of those specific examples would be helpful, so that we can first of all review those to see whether the language was appropriate. Another way, David, would be when we are next inspected, and we've just had Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary inspect us on child protection matters, where they were in force over the course of 2 weeks, and we have to send them a large number of files, referrals, and we get quizzed around it. We've not had the official response back from them, but we have a hot debrief, and generally we were seen as having giving a good service to children. I take your point around children in need and plans, and obviously we work closely with partners with regard to that. So I think there's a couple of routes through this. If you can give us a couple of examples that we can look at. And of course, in certain circumstances, if officers feel that parents or guardians at an address where children are present, we encourage officers to listen to the voice of the child. Then they may well have said that individuals were angry, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that's just for Black families. You know, we could see it across, because we can take then a cross section of our referrals to see whether other language like that is used across those reports. And of course, generally, when we go to domestic incidents, often there is anger, and that is a fact.
Absolutely. Matt, I don't get me wrong. What I was always getting at, and I've said this to Clive quite a few years ago, I would love to get an analysis of the number of families referred into Hertfordshire, regardless of for whatever reason, yeah, and those that are subject to child protection plan. I guarantee you that the majority of families referred into the MASH team, they end up being subject to child protection plan when compared to white families. And that's been my experience of working in Hertfordshire. I don't work in Hertfordshire, but I will at the present. But I'll give you one example. Everybody, please, Clive, give me one.
Elaine, sorry.
Give me 1 second, Clive.
Let me just say this before you come in, because I think the number what you're talking about is potentially there is an issue of cultural bias.
Clive, can I just finish 1 second, and that will actually put that into context in what you're saying. Okay. I'm going to explain something to you, Matt. Just one case. and how damaging that was for the family. Mixed race, Jamaican Greek family, young girl, yeah? She turned around to her sister who's 15 years old, yeah? And she goes, say for example, her name was Janine, yeah? She said, Janine, this is in front of a social worker. If you dirty my kitchen, I'm gonna kill you. Now, everybody on this forum knows that's not actually meant to be anything, yeah? That ended up on that child's file, yeah? And will follow that child throughout their entire life, yeah? Police were called, and process started to bring that person's children into care. I took it on and I said, no, it's just something that we say. It's a throwaway comment. Back in the day when a black man said, I'm gonna kill you, police will arrest them. If they were, you know, if them and they were probably sectioned and so on and so forth. Those were things that happened in the 70s. I was shocked when I came across that. And I had to try and explain the context of our language and how that was meant. That's an example.
Okay.
Sorry, Clive.
Thank you very much. What I would say to conclude what I was going to say, that I think the nub of what Elaine's case is that where is your assurance that actually there isn't any cultural bias in the way your processes operate, so that because someone is from a different culture, you are going to evaluate and assess them without taking into account those kind of cultural differences that they bring. So I think there's a question to consider. How do you ensure that potential cultural biases are eliminated from the process that you have in place? And I don't know if that's something that you have any thoughts on, Matt, in terms of that.
Well, I mean, that could take up an entire evening's discussion.
So maybe then Elaine is right that we do need to have a conversation about this and to think about how that might, because I think it is an important point about impacting on the complete welfare and future of our young people. And
I agree. And maybe if I could be so bold, maybe you know, the next time, you know, by all means, let's have that discussion, let's have that debate. But it would be nice to actually have it in a physical room, a forum, a sufficiently large one, if people are still anxious about COVID. But I think it allows a more fluid debate than
it does. Your point is
Chair
taken.
Maxine has had her hand up for a long time.
Maxime, welcome, and your question.
Yes, my question is, because I work in the healthcare industry, and I have experience working with young Black or people of colour in mental health. So I just wanted to ask you, Matt, are more officers going to be trained in knowing how to identify young people of colour regarding their mental health? Because I have seen young Black kids who have been identified in mental health services, and the way that some of the police officers are handling the young people, I don't think they have any understanding. And it goes back to what Elaine says. It seems like it is a cultural bias where when you don't have that full knowledge, then you won't be able to understand and how to move forward with a better solution.
So very briefly, Chair, again, we could have a whole evening on mental health service provision in this country currently. This is an area that police have ended up dealing with, and we recognise that we are not trained mental health professionals. There are trained mental health professionals, but I think most people would accept that there aren't enough of those. So frequently, police officers find themselves dealing with people in crises, and more, that is young people in crises. And so we do give officers a level of training, but they will never be as well trained as mental health practitioners. And there is a lot of discussion and debate at the moment, and David will be cited on it, that the level of mental health service provision across the country, it's not just a Hertfordshire thing, needs some serious attention. So yes, police officers police officers would love to not to have to deal with people in mental health crises, and that it goes to trained individuals. But the reality is we are a 24/7 service. We're now often the service of first and last resort. And so we do step into that space under our human rights articles to protect and save life. And so regularly we are dealing with individuals in crisis, and it's sad and very difficult. So again, Clive, I would say a debate for another occasion, but please bring those that are trained into that discussion.
Okay, thank you.
And if I might come in, I think the issue we're skirting around, but I think it's just one for us all to go away and think about, which is my policing crime plan really focuses on how we can prevent rather than to respond. Policing is seen as a crisis service. It goes to people when they're in crisis. It often picks up what other services have failed to do, and it often picks up when other services aren't there. So we all know that a mental health nurse in place before someone hits crisis, or indeed immediately after, is going to be far better than a police officer turning up. Some of the issues we've been talking tonight about having cultural awareness are clearly part of what they've got to be able to do in that crisis response. And that's something that we're trying to do. But actually, if we can somehow move the agenda up so that the crime isn't happening in the first place, that we're better understanding we are better understanding the issues there and putting the support in place to people so that they don't have drug and alcohol dependency, so that they don't have mental health crises, and so that they don't come from families where there has been domestic abuse. We will get to a place where there is less crime, and actually we'll get to a place where some of these issues which currently are really the focus will not need to be such focus. And if we get to a place where culturally we can encourage people not to carry knives, for example, and we haven't raised that, but that whole issue about disproportionality in stop and search is linked to that disproportionality of the amount of young black men who are carrying knives. And we are seeing not only that it is 4 times as likely we've heard about being stopped and searched, but we are, in fact, I think it's higher than that, but we're not only just seeing that, but we're seeing that there's a 9 times more likely outcome of death for young black men through stabbing than for young white men. And we can't allow that to happen. It would be outrageous if we just stand by whilst young black men are dying on the streets because of knife crime. So, these are the sorts of things, these are the difficult things we've got to do. And I don't know how we get there, because I recognize that in some ways, the lack of trust that some members of the black community have in police themselves exacerbates this problem. And that's what I'm trying to get to. And I hope that by talking and hearing how we might be able to help, I hope that what we've done this evening has taken us a little bit closer towards making sure that there are fewer people who die through knife wounds on the streets, which is one of the key things for me. And as always, especially when being recorded, Hertfordshire is a really safe place. It is really unlikely that you will be stabbed on the streets in Hertfordshire. But all the same, one victim of crime, one victim of serious violent crime is one too many, and we've got to all work together to make sure it doesn't happen.
Absolutely. David, I was going to ask you.
David, thank you for that. And sorry, Clive, but I'm just going to go back to what you're saying. Is
No, Elaine, sorry.
prevention
Elaine,
is better than. Sorry, Clive. Give me 1 second. Prevention is better than cure.
Yeah,
And
indeed.
I get that message.
Okay,
And
okay,
I'm not going to
absolutely.
go back. I'm not going to go back on the domestic abuse issue, because domestic abuse affects everybody, regardless of what color you are. My concern is about the young people and the damage to their emotional well-being and their future outcomes.
Absolutely.
Now, I just want to say, and I know that because I've been one of the trainers, the Department for Work and Pensions invested 37 million, yeah, with capital across the entire country to reduce parental conflict. Yeah, and that was an early intervention program. Now, I trained in many local authorities, including Hertfordshire, and I've only ever seen one, I think 3 PSOs attended those training programs, and that was early intervention. Not your officers, police officers did not attend those training.
Okay.
Hertfordshire can give you the statistics.
Yeah.
Now, I'm just going to finish off, Clive, by saying, as a social worker, when you read the chronology of a case where police has attended the home of a family 3-4 times and NFA a visit, no further action, yeah? 4 years later, yeah, there's a serious incident of domestic violence. My thing is,
Elaine, sorry,
there was three points where they could have intervened, and they're not participating in the training.
Right, Elaine, we're going to have to finish this conversation
Clive.
another time. Sorry, because Matt has got to leave in any event, and we need to formalize the end of this particular process. Can I just say that clearly what you can both see from tonight is that there are real concerns. There are real bases for those concerns. It's great that you're actually here with us engaging this conversation. It needs clearly to be seen, or should I say, we do need to see changes taking place in terms of some differences in outcome. I was going to say earlier on that actually you don't necessarily need more Black officers. If the white officers that you have are actually treating the community fairly, then actually we wouldn't be having a conversation about representation. Having said that, representation is important, but first and foremost, we want to make sure that our community gets just outcome like any other community would have with respect to the way policing operates. And clearly in the community, in this meeting, there isn't a feeling that that currently is the reality that exists. Now, as an organization, if you are committed to make the change, and you say that you are, then we are committed to part of the journey to make that change too. So I think you've had a volunteer come up. There are some things that's emerged from this meeting that we need to follow up on, and there may well be some need to look at getting an appropriate group of people together that might address some of the points that Elaine has been raising. Where it looks like we're going to have to devote a specific meeting to talk about some of those things. I mean, I know I cut her off because actually we have to finish, but actually I don't underestimate the importance of what happens with our young people. They are our future, and if we destroy them before they've lived, then actually we're destroying our own future and certainly their future. So we need to do something about that. So I'm going to say thank you very much for coming along, the two of you. We will.
Clive, are we going to see David and Matt again?
That's what I'm going to say. We are going to continue this conversation because clearly it's not concluded. So there are some things that's been raised there that we need to come back to. There are some things that we haven't been able to explore. So we need to look at a follow-up meeting. Now we're probably looking at the new year to take this on board, but we'll be back in touch with you. So thank you very much. Before everybody leaves,
can we get somebody from the local safeguarding board on or somebody that you work with, David?
Do you work with a safe? Look, we need to get some partnership around the agenda. I think it will be in all of our interest to do that. So let's look at identify some of those partners that need to be at a meeting, and we'll get them together. Just to change the agenda, this Friday we're launching Black History Month, and I think you may all have received an invite, and if you haven't, then please contact us, because we are looking at a program of activities across the month. It may be that as part of that process, we may want to build in, maybe not in October, but as soon as we can, an engagement along the lines which is maybe outside of a general meeting that we've been talking about with picking up some of these issues. So do come along if you can on Friday. Spread the word about that, because as we say within the organization, together we can achieve. I'm actually going to defer the rest of the agenda because we've gone way beyond the time that we might have anticipated. So we can actually come back to doing that. But did anyone else want to say any final things? Because if not, I'll just thank David and Matt again and say we'll speak again soon. Any final words from any of the members for?
Are we going to stay? Are we going to stay online when Matt and David leave, or we're just going to end?
Well,
I'll leave now, but thanks so much. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you, David.
Okay.
Take care.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you very much. Thank you all.
Thank
Speak
you,
again
Matt.
soon. All the best.
Thanks.
Hi, Clive. Is this?
Yeah.
I just got the link to come on now. Is it been recorded? So can I get a recording?
Actually, I think I better stop the recording now. So it has been recorded.
Oh, Clive, I'm sorry.